Here we are talking about grief and the holidays with our guest, Tom Farnsworth. Tom, welcome to the show. And maybe you could share a little bit about your journey with grief. I'd like to hear about that, wherever you want to start.
So, I was a graduate student back in the early 90s, and I really learned about grief by working on the crisis line initially, and then there was a program, and I learned a lot. One theoretical thing I remember is you've sort of worked through your grief when you have emotionally relocated the deceased. And that sounded kind of a bit hokey for me at first, but I think that's actually what happens in the grief process. And actually, the end of my first year of graduate school, my dad passed away. He died.
Can we
Thought I.
stop it for a second with that? Because I don't know if this was a coping or just who you are as a part-time stand-up comedian, but when you when you were talking at your dad's memorial, this is the only experience I've had at a memorial celebration of life where I had to bite the inside of my cheek, not to laugh out loud at your jokes, and it seemed really struggled in the audience. So how did you come up with that, and how did it
Well,
help you?
it's interesting you bring that up, Chrissy, because I am a bit of a stand-up comedian, but I guess I told some old stories about my dad. I can't remember what I said about him, but I'm sure he was a stand-up comedian too. Me feel more comfortable if I could, say some funny things about my dad that maybe perhaps people didn't know about him. So, but yeah, thank you for asking about that. And I think it helped me feel better too and get through the day.
It looks
Um,
like it still touches you. I mean, even though that was
oh,
such a
absolutely.
long time ago.
It was 1994, so
Right.
that's 31 years ago, more than that now. And yeah, I think you asking me about it kind of brought up those memories. But we always spent Christmas at home, but because my father had died, my mom said, let's go spend Christmas in Canada because her family was all from the Toronto area. So we went up to Toronto for Christmas, which was a strange experience for me, not being home. And also, I always, and this sounds a little strange, but it is kind of funny as I look back on it now. But at the time, it was painful. So the previous May, my aunt had come to my father's funeral. My father was buried in Virginia in Arlington National Cemetery, and they had driven down from Toronto to come to the funeral. So she had taken a lot of pictures. And of course, this is before the internet, more or less. So, you take pictures with a regular camera. So she had all these pictures. And we were kind of getting ready to kind of wrap up and go home. And she said, oh, by the way, here's some pictures of your dad's funeral. And I mean, there was the casket, it was, the burial. And I ran in the bathroom, burst into tears, thought about it later. My aunt's timing was not the greatest. And so, Merry Christmas, Tom. And here's some pictures of your dead father. And I just now I think about it, it's kind of funny. At the time, it was painful. All that to say that my experience of grief personally, I think it bears in the literature, is that when you work through the grief process, for the most part, there's always grief at all times, but when you work through the major part of it, my experience has been that you can remember memories of your loved one, but they're not painful anymore. They're like, whether they're good memories or bad memories, there's not the pain associated with the memory that you have when you're going through the grief process. So yeah, I just think here's Merry Christmas and here's pictures of your dead father. Happy New Year. So I don't know.
Well,
I
that
find
sort
it.
of speaks to how awkward people are with grief, right? Because of
I'm
Western
wondering about
society.
your journey, Tom, from studying psychology to becoming a monk, and how did that come
Hmm.
about? And what's your order?
Hmm.
And maybe you could say a little bit about
Sure.
that and any loss that you might have gone through.
Initially college seminary, and I I met these two Catholic priests, and one was named Father Jim, the other was Father Bob, and they were both clinical psychologists. And in the seminary, Father Jim had sort of created this pastoral center, and both he and Father Bob worked in the center. And I actually went to see Father Bob for therapy briefly. And when I was in the process of therapy, um, I said to myself, you know what? I think I could sit in that other chair and do what he's doing if I, went to school, got training, and so forth. And but they both were really great role models, not only as priests but also psychologists. And actually, Father Jim had done the initial psycho, what do you call it? Psychodiagnostic assessment testing for me. And like, it was the strangest experience because when I got the feedback, I'm like, how did this man learn so much about me from these tests? And like, he was like, it was almost like I had bared my soul to him, which I mean, I guess I did a clinical history of some sort. But anyway, and I have to say this, and again, this is funny to me now. At the time, I didn't quite know what I mean. He said, well, he said, you are the most neurotic 17-year-old I've ever met in my clinical practice. So I hold that as a badge of honor, you know? So I think initially that's how that seed was planted in me to somehow become a psychologist and then also like a brother or a priest. Our order is called the Society of Mary or the Marianists. And we kind of do similar apostolic work that, like the Jesuits do with universities and teaching and so forth. But I never really thought I would be a teacher until they said, well, we're a teaching order. Why don't you give it a shot? So I did. No training, by the way, formally. But it was a great experience of work and ministry, really. One of my colleagues, his name's Dr. Roger Reed there, he said, Tom, it's a very interesting combination of the doctorate in psychology and become being a Marianist monk or a Marianist brother. Very interesting combination. I'm not sure what he meant by that, but I think it was complimentary actually. So, um, but yeah, I had many happy years at the University of Dayton, and now I'm on a sabbatical here in Palm Springs, California. And my mom died in 2017. And again, as I shared before, I kind of had that experience of there were all these pictures that my mom had saved over the years, and and I couldn't deal with them, And I just said, I'm throwing them all away. And thank God, my cousin Mary Alice, who's the oldest cousin, and she was very close with my mom. Actually, they were always very close. And she said, "Don't do that. I'll take them for you for now." And she took them and kept them for a year. And a year later, I went back to visit, and she said, "What do you think about the photos?" And I said, "I liked them." And she said, "I thought so." So she had a nice little suitcase she had of her own or got for me, and she said, "Here's all the pictures," and I just rolled them home on the plane. Again, as I said before, the experience of the pictures from my aunt Terry were very painful, and I just couldn't deal with all those pictures because they had so many memories. But now I can look at them. In fact, I still have them here, and I was looking at them around Thanksgiving weekend, and I'm flooded with many happy memories, and there's no longer any pain associated. So I think I've achieved what William Warden would say, emotional relocation of the deceased, where you find a place in your heart for them, basically. They live on forever there. And this time of year is very difficult for people that have had losses because they remember them. And, it doesn't seem like Christmas without grandma there. I have a story about my father. Again, Chrissy, I so wish you could have met my father. You'd say, my God, he's just like Tom, or Tom just like him. Anyway, so he used to say practically every year at Christmas, oh, my grandma would say, this is his mother now, my grandmother on his side, would say, oh, isn't it a wonderful Christmas that we're all together? And he'd say, well, glad you've enjoyed it, mother. It might be your last one. I think the nerve my dad had, like, I mean, come on, like, that's not socially acceptable. But in my family, Chrissy, I think socially acceptable sometimes goes out the window, especially around the holidays. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and my background and my own grief, and I always tell people what I learned through the grief program. Whatever you feel is okay. It's normal and natural, and there's no timetable with grief. Everyone has a different timetable.
What about in your order, Tom, in your community? How is grief handled? Is there any, particular training that you
Mm.
had or people that you've worked with that you can talk about?
I didn't really experience that in the order. We really, we how can I put it in a kind way? Teetering on here. I don't think a lot of the gentlemen that have been in community with, joined very young, and like 18, and they've been what we call lifers in religious life, so they've been there their whole life. And I wouldn't say all of them, but a good number. I don't think they ever learned how to deal with grief. And if a brother dies, he's prayed for 9 days throughout the whole world. I mean, all the communities of the world. It's sent an announcement, and you pray for him. We keep a fond and pious remembrance of them, and we also have what's called a necrology. So let's say that a brother dies this past year. He's prayed for 9 days. Of course, he has his funeral and all that and burial. And then every year on his date of death, or every day in our daily prayer, we pray for him, like on his anniversary of death. And it's a nice way to sort of remember uh, brothers that have died. Remember them, to have a pious and grateful remembrance, which is in our rule of life. Um, but to also like make the person come alive for a minute. You know what I mean? Because otherwise, he's just a name on a page that I never knew him. I heard through the old brothers, it got passed down. Work hard, because a good brother dies at his desk. And we actually had a brother at the University of Dayton that literally died at his desk. He was in his black suit, gave all his blue book exams, got them all graded, got the grades recorded. This is before, internet, on his desk, and then he just keeled over on his desk and died. And I shouldn't laugh about it. But I mean, I think that's how that phrase came, a good brother dies at his desk. Well, maybe I'm not a good brother because I want to die maybe on a beach in Hawaii, or maybe here in Palm Springs, or maybe at a casino, in Vegas. So I don't really want to die at my desk. So that's a long way to say that sometimes some brothers aren't so good with dealing with their feelings, and I think death can be really difficult because some of them have known the guys that have died for 50 years, but I didn't get any formal training to answer your question in grief at all. I probably had more training, and even sometimes when I would bring stuff up, like they said, "Well, don't bring that up. That's that we don't want to talk about that." That's I
Tell
just
you not
think.
to
Well,
bring up something that might make people feel
well,
uncomfortable.
we just think that way, and sometimes we verbalize and we normalize, and I just thought. I don't know. I just thought out of a human connection, I wanted to say something about, brother so and so that had died, or that I knew this about him and so forth, and they might say something like, "Oh, we never knew that about him," because often in my community, what happens is of people, right? So people would know of me and say, "Oh, that guy Farnsworth, he's a psychologist, and he's crazy. He's from California or whatever." They have a little bias against Californians in Ohio, by the way. Hard to believe, but true.
What about some of the
But
students that you have worked with? And is there anything that comes to mind about, helping
oh yeah,
someone get
yeah.
through their own losses, whether it's loss of relationship or just being away from home or a death?
Sure, sure. But, it would be a common experience, homesickness, and then, formal death sometimes of a brother or sister, or even a parent, sadly. So
How is
with
that
the experience,
handled?
I remember doing emails to students about it. So I would always try in an email to give a little grief support, your paragraph, and pull out these phrases like that I received from. I remember when my father died. a priest from the seminary where I had studied for a while wrote me a beautiful letter, and I still remember it. I think it said something like, "Losing a parent is never easy, um, and nothing ever quite fills the emptiness. But I hope and pray that you will continue to live a life that will be a great tribute to the memory of your father." Like, I can still remember the letter that he wrote me. Powerful. In fact, uh, that letter, I won't know it. I still remember to this day. It kind of changed my life. And interestingly, regarding grief, I guess I always had a good pastoral people, because I remember uh, my classmate died, and I think so. I wrote a letter to, I guess, the family, or maybe to the mom and the dad. And do you know, I was at my high school reunion this past year, and she brought it up, and she said, "You know that letter you wrote to my mom? She's never forgotten it. She saved it. She reads it over and over every year around the time of death." And sometimes you do something like that, and you think nothing of it, right? And it made a tremendous influence on her life, as did this letter from Father Rich to me when my father died. So I would have students tell me that email really meant a lot to them, or it really helped them, when they're dealing with the practicalities of losing someone. So we never know the influence we can make. And writing a letter and taking the time to write a sympathy card to someone, and throwing a few words in there of care, can make a tremendous uh, impact on someone that's lost someone, I think. And I don't think we should underestimate that.
Yeah, that honest, heartfelt communication.
Yeah, it really helps you. So you never know what difference you can make in someone's life by just writing a note. Um,
By just
and I think
being
he says,
yourself, right?
being yourself, and even using a little humor at a funeral.
What I've been
And
noticing, Tom, is that the practice of self love is missing. That a lot of people who are in pain are so disconnected. Even within your community, I imagine there's people who feel like they don't really belong, or they're disconnected, and have an old recording in their heads of why they don't measure up, or why they're not good enough. And part of that spiritual development really is about self-love, because how can you have compassion for others without it? Good. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
for the holidays coming up, um, maybe you're not going to feel that joy that you feel in your heart on Christmas, or the excitement and wonder and looking forward to the new year. And if you don't, that's okay. And don't beat yourself up if you're not feeling in the Christmas spirit, so to speak. Um, and just acknowledge that's okay, and give yourself a break, as you said, self-love. And maybe you need to withdraw, and you take an hour for yourself when you're at the family gathering, if you go, or New Year's Eve, or however you choose to celebrate that. So that would be my best simple advice: is just be patient and loving with yourself, and whatever you feel is okay. Try to imagine a time, maybe in the future, where you won't feel as sad on a holiday because you miss your loved ones, and that you'll remember, have the memories, the good memories of them, and without the pain, because that, in my experience, has been what happens eventually. If they're suffering, um, they're in my heart and my prayers during this Christmas season.
Perfect.